These are unusual times, unusual places. It is customary for the person who stands at the front to welcome everyone, so thank you very much. It is sad. It is also peace somehow, and today we are here to say farewell to somebody who meant a lot to you as a family, to us as a church community. I happen to represent a larger community this morning, but thank you very much for making it, and thank you for the effort put into organizing the program. I'd like to invite Victor to offer an opening prayer, please.
Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, and your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Forgive us this day our trespasses, as we forgive them who trespass against us. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
Thank you, Victor. Now, I will be reading a little bit of a life sketch, and they are yours notes, so you will recognize them, though I was given permission to adapt them a little bit. So, Pastor Brian Pilmoor had an extraordinary zest for life, with a strong aspiration to make 100 years. He left school at 14 and was fortunate to work at Terry's Chocolate in the recently established graphic design and display department. So wrappers like all gold were among his early designs. During this time, he went to the York School of Art to develop his abilities in fine art, the ability to capture attention, communicate ideas, the interplay between light and darkness, proportions, and a sense of perspective, all of which transferred to his pastoral context. In 1939, he was obliged to enlist for military service, to whom he offered the skill of camouflage artist, which was sufficiently diffuse for his papers to become unnoticed, with the belief that this would help him avoid combat, for which he had no desire. In 1942, he joined the RAF, was posted to India, and deployed in Delhi as a cartographer, drawing detailed pen and ink maps of aerial photographs for the ground forces in Burma. In 1946, he returned to York with the determination to submit his life to the Lord and to serve purposes greater than himself. While still uniformed, he met Dorothy, whose love he shared for almost 70 years. He was particularly inspired by a worldview that envisaged an end to war and the conflicts of powerful agencies, a world where people live healthfully and in harmony. The symmetry of Christ's rest on the Sabbath was a theme he came to repeat often. Prepared for ministry by attending Newbold College, his alma mater was the environment in which his love developed and his ideas were honed, this also becoming a homely and thought-provoking environment for his final years. To the end, he would visit the libraries in Binfield and Newbold to pursue his passion for information and new ideas. In 1960, Brian was called to pastor a brand new church which became a beacon of Adventist presence on one of the main boulevards of Lusaka, northern Rhodesia. This was followed by service in Salisbury, Harare, and during this term, he established and built a small church in Mutare. After furlough and more studied at Newbold, he was called as Bible teacher and pastor at Rusangu Secondary School, providing opportunity for hundreds of young people many of whom became significant contributors to public life in the newly independent Zambia, with several who now enrich the fabric of the church in Britain. During his time at the school, the 600 students worshipped in the dining room. Brian had a vision for a church building and started a fund. For his part, he grew a grove of pawpaw trees and sold them to students. He also had a vision for pastoral development with the idea of a seminary for Zambia. And while others complemented and completed the task, he was among those who vocalized the possibility. At the school, the students were involved in a work program which included farm work to feed students and the development of the campus, which was Brian's assignment. His artistic eye contributed to the layout and planting such that students would have an aesthetic experience. Those who misbehaved would be given tasks, including watering plants. At his home, he created a reservoir which was occasionally used for student baptisms. In his last year, 155 students were baptized. Dorothy, Brian's wife, was taught domestic science, but also organized a team of girls in the production of school uniforms, shirts for boys and dresses for girls at a time when many students had impoverished wardrobes. The machinery was funded by the sale of material to local people. Brian acquired bicycles for students to cycle to distant villages to establish branch Sabbath schools, the outcome of which was probably not evaluated, but no doubt contributed to the growth of the church in that region. His work on the grounds exposed him to the sun on his balding head. For this reason, plus a dose of vanity, he purchased a toupee, which was a source of fascination and Western magic to students. When students lost concentration, he would either briefly remove the hairpiece or on occasion expose his false teeth. After his hearing and eyesight were impaired, his sense of humor persisted. He believed that humor was a healing gift from God to help us live with the pain of situations we cannot explain. Like many, however, his legacy lies in the lives of individual students and their families. While teaching as an eccentric in the English tradition, Brian began looking for patterns that he believed brought harmony between biblical texts and the ideas of science. This became something of an obsession and a theme of research for the rest of his life. While some of his ideas were stretched, his curiosity and capacity for research were an inspiration for many young people with whom he had a remarkable rapport. His approach, whatever the topic was, to look for an additional dimension, a life skill that opened his canvas against those with closed and certain ideas. He lives at home in Binfield, cluttered with writing, some illustrated with pen and ink diagrams and collected into booklets, representing his pattern of thought over the last 50 years. To every young person, he would say, never stop learning. At almost 99, Brian, a man with an earthy Yorkshire outlook, subtle humor and repartee, leaves an entertained family represented by sons Victor and Roy, their bemused wives Anne and Sandra, along with 4 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren, almost with the fashion that the number 4 has special significance. Brian suffered an incurable skull infection for more than a year. In his final weeks, he was isolated by the dreaded COVID virus and died on May the 10th, having been visited by his sons in the final days. We now look forward to the return of the Lord Jesus and that resurrection day. Thank you, Victor, for putting these words together so nicely. We will play a piece of music now. I don't think we'll attempt to sing it, but we will play it. I heard the voice of Jesus say.
Thank you. to read the scripture reading, and this was one of Brian's favourite psalms, and I'm sure many of us also appreciate it too. Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of your enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overfloweth. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Thank you, Eric. Now, I can't refer to him as Brian. I knew him as Pastor Pilmoor, so with your permission, I will still refer to him as that. So, knowing him and his love for numbers, I will be remiss if in this afternoon's reflection I would not make use of some. Difficult circumstances, such as the loss of a loved one, do at least two things. On the one hand, they bring to the fore very strong emotions of loss and regret. On the other hand, they make us search for reasons to hope and for sources of comfort. Generally, there are again two main aspects of our life stories which capture our attention. First, the events, the circumstances, the things that happened as they were captured in the lovely life sketch that I read earlier on. On the other hand, the second aspect is the touch points, the things we did together, the things we spoke of, the things we celebrated, but also the points of departure, when we disagreed, when we expressed disagreement, when we failed to express disagreement. Also, when we come to a situation like this, when we consider somebody else's life, we also reflect on our own mortality and the legacy we leave behind. So for the purpose of this very, very brief reflection, allow me to raise a question. How do we measure life? After all, we are here to briefly recognize and reflect on a good and long life. Usually we measure our lifespan with birth being the beginning and death the end. The measuring stick are the years which determine one's age. We deem a long life to be around 90 years or so. However, is that the best way to measure a life? Ralph Waldo Emerson acknowledges a French statement which translates as, God works in moments. He writes, we ask for long life, but it is deep life or grand moments that signify. He concludes by saying, let the measure of time be spiritual, not mechanical. Let the measure of time be spiritual, not mechanical. Perhaps he is right. After all, the life of a car is measured not only by the year in which it was built, but also by the numbers of miles it has been driven. Likewise, the number of printed pages in a printer tells us much more than how many years ago it was manufactured. Time is less important than actual usage and service. Listening to Pastor Pilmoor's life story, one probably can conclude that he benefited from both mileage and lifespan. Let the measure of time be spiritual, not mechanical. From a Christian point of view, Henry Nouwen highlights this spiritual dimension of life. He says, we seldom realize fully that we are sent to fulfill God-given tasks. We act as if we're simply dropped down in creation and have to decide to entertain ourselves until we die. But we were sent into this world by God just as Jesus was. Once we start living our lives with that conviction, we'll soon know what we were sent to do. Question: do the milestones in our lives, the highlights of our existence, do they reflect a deep concern for God? In other words, a God-minded person will have a different set of priorities which will help them determine how to fill the years they have been granted. So one can accomplish a lot. One can earn academic degrees, achieve professional status, be promoted to corporate leadership, become distinguished executive. One can fill one's life with extensive and exotic travel. One can produce and accumulate material accessories. All of those are very worthy pursuits. But are they God-filled or inspired moments? Can it be said of us that the measure of our time on this earth is not mechanical, but spiritual? Karl Rahner writes this: God must be sought and found in the things of our world. He says, in the daily duties, everyday life must become itself our prayer. So, reading the summary of Pastor Pilmoor's life, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the breadth of one's life. He had both span and usage. How about depth, though? We said earlier on that the measure of time should not be mechanical, but spiritual. Now, I had the privilege of knowing Pastor Pilmoor for the past couple of years. What stood out for me were at least 4 things. But today I will mention 5 just to mess up a bit with him. As so far we use 2s and multiples of 2s. Number 1, his zest for life. There was no stopping him. Life was not easy, but he kept living. If I will be 90, I wish to have the desire and ability to join a weekly walking group or walk up and down the village regularly, if I were to be 90. Secondly, he had an amazing sense of humor. During his weekly visits to the office, he would always share some witty comment or a joke with us, and Elena and I enjoyed him coming to visit us. Number 3, his creativity, whether in the service of Terry's chocolates or the creative ways of helping students fund their studies in Zambia, or his paintings and drawings, his presentations of God, he brimmed with creativity. Number 4, his thirst for the knowledge of God, because for him there were always new insights, new revelations, new angles to be explored, new pamphlets and books in the making. A lifetime was not enough for him, thirsting for the knowledge of God. And number 5, just because I promised, his commitment and passion for God. Pastor Pilmoor was passionate about God during his formal serving years as pastors and beyond. Actually, it was very difficult not to know that he believed in God, and very often details of his faith in the village, on the bus, in the hospital, wherever he found himself, people knew he believed in God. For Pastor Pilmoor, life was not only mechanical, it was deeply spiritual. The best way to illustrate this is using this very well-known Bible passage which Pastor Pilmoor indicated he would like read at the service, Psalm 23. So thank you, Eric, for reading it. In this psalm, the writer is concerned with both the material, the mechanical aspects of life, but also the spiritual. In fact, there is a movement from the mechanical to the spiritual. It starts with green pastures and quiet waters and bright paths. It continues with dark valleys and laden tables. For all intents and purposes, that's the making of a material, a mechanical, a real life, the good and the bad of it. But what sets David apart is his ever-growing discernment for the spiritual. God, the good shepherd at first, provides the material for our enjoyment, but most importantly, as a means to encourage and facilitate the spiritual. Even Jesus said, what good is it to someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? So David, the man and the king, learns to find the presence of God in the material, the here and now, as well as in the future, but also in the spiritual, to be of far greater value than the mechanical and material. So I started this morning by asking a question: how do we measure a life? I suggested to you the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson that life is better measured in the spiritual than in the mechanical. And the best proof is in the lives of those who, like Pastor Pilmoor, discovered this reality to be true for themselves. One, at a micro level, the daily struggle, the juggling, the drastic swing between the spiritual and material in our daily lives. But two, at a macro level, when all is said and done, things are sifted. That which remains and is of eternal value will always be the thirst and hunger for God. So, to totally mess up with numbers, make him angry if he was here is my 3-part prayer. May we be granted the wisdom to tell apart the mechanical from the spiritual, the things of greater value from those of lesser. May we know that when all is said and done, the mechanical is but an enjoyable means for the spiritual. And may we not be distracted by one at the expense of the other. And thirdly, may we pursue God and the things of God today in everything we do, with everything we have. In the words of Psalm 23, may we enjoy the experience of dining with God here and now, but most importantly, dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. But until then, we shall remember Pastor Pilmoor for experiencing the depth and breadth of this life, while pointing us towards the spiritual. So I say, rest in peace, my friend, and thank you for teaching us how to live well. We'll play a song, "The Lord is my Shepherd," at his request. For the final committal, can I invite you to stand, please? Because we know that in His infinite love and wisdom, God has permitted our father, our grandfather, our friend, Pastor Brian Pilmoor, to fall asleep in the Lord Jesus and lay down the burdens of this life. Today, we lovingly commit his body into God's care. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, remembering as we do that all the issues of life are in the hands of the everlasting Father of love and compassion, and that he has promised eternal life to those who love him. Amen.
Monty Python had a life of Brian, and ours had its moments. Dad navigated his life and his family through simple rules, and I'll share just a few. The earliest I remember was pick up your feet. People, he believed, should walk with a determined step. Then he'd say, see something on the ground, pick it up, it will come in sometime. He grew up in years of shortage, and among his stuff, there would always be a nut for every bolt. As a Yorkshireman, he would say, look after your pennies. He'd never needlessly spend, and when we bought him clothes for Christmas, he'd wear them when the old ones wore out. The Oxford shop was his outfitter of preference. He was a saver. Church money and time were sacred. Yet, he was generous for the causes that he believed in. And he would say, any fool can take things apart, but few can put them together. He was a DIY person, but would rarely get under the bonnet without an instruction manual. The modern touch and see approach was way beyond his grasp. And he would say, there's a power in regularity. Getting up, worship, meals, bedtime were done at set hours, with breaches sometimes a cause of frustration. As teenagers, 10 o'clock was bedtime, no matter how long the party lasted. Then he would say, quoting the Bible, that which a man sows, that shall he also reap. He believed that things came around, and in his late years he was the beneficiary of much kindness from all kinds of people. Strangers at McDonald's would pay for his burger and chips. Others would give him free samples. Young people would chat on the bus or the train. And then to quote, he would say, people should be thinkers and not mere reflectors. As a maverick, Dad entertained his own ideas regardless of convention. He read newspapers, journals, books, and would always have his own twist. All well and good, save that now his sons and grandchildren also have independence of mind. He would say, there's always another dimension, and no matter what the presentation, Dad would look for another angle. Inevitably, people would present ideas in threes, and then he'd search for the fourth, either to complement or to contradict. He would say it's not either or, but both and. Dad would always ask what happens when we put ideas together. And then he would quote, the laws that rule the atom are those that rule the human mind. He searched for consistency between the Bible and nature was unrelenting, a passion he pursued. He penned thousands of pages, and their value was in the process of writing. Finally, he would say, not saying grace is a disgrace. So here we go. Thank you, Dad. You've led up front, and we're grateful.
Hello, I'm Roy, Brian's youngest son. I want to reflect with you about my father. If you want to describe him, you might say he's eccentric, he's inquisitive, he can be funny, he can be meticulous or chaotic, he can be annoying or embarrassing, and sometimes all of these almost all at the same time. But since the war, his overriding passion has been to tell others about Jesus. As an example, we were on a family weekend in Northumbria, walking along the Roman Hadrian's Wall. And as we walked, we would meet fellow walkers, and he would interrupt them and say, "Hello, have you seen any Romans around here?" Well, in giggles and signs of amusement, they would say, "Oh no, sorry, we haven't." So I'll tell you why. And he would take out his little Bible from inside his jacket and say, "I've got a letter to the Romans. I'd like to read you some." So he would turn to the book of Romans and read one or two verses to them before we then proceeded on our way. Dad was also quick-witted. On a recent holiday that Sandra and I had in India, we were walking around the lake in Udipar. And I texted my father saying, "Dad, we're walking around Lake Piccola." We carried on walking. A couple of minutes later, I got a text back from him and said, "I rode around the lake when I was in India on the Maharaja's horse." Well, it wasn't just plain talk. We found a picture of him on the Maharaja's horse and a painting of Udahar in the last few days. Very sharp he is. Many of you have shared Dad's passion for walking. But I recall a situation when we were in Zambia at a secondary school where my father was teaching. We were planning to take the students out for a Sabbath afternoon walk. But the countryside, unlike England, was much more barren, but one thing they had was beautiful birds. But they were hard to find. So my dad decided to paint on cardboard a series of birds. So he painted these and cut them out, and I was sent out along the route to pin these birds to various trees along the route. This would enable the students to spot the birds as we walked along. Well, the walk started and off we went. And when we found the first bird, we'd say, "Look, there's a hoopoe there in the tree." All the students looked and all looked around, and of course as quiet as could be, not. And then some of the boys, they wanted to see if they could catch the bird. So they went round and snuck round the back of the tree and to try and get behind the bird and see if they could catch it. Alas, when they got to the halfway round, the bird disappeared. And of course they realized this wasn't a real bird. And to all of their delight, they went and took the bird out the tree and brought it back to the group. Oh, what a day it was. We continued the walk and we enjoyed the rest of the birds that we found. But that was Dad.
I'm Sandra, Brian's daughter-in-law. In the past few years, I've enjoyed working with him in the garden. My tribute to him is this flower arrangement. I felt that the hefty boots reflected his love of walking in long grass, in short grass, in the fields, walking to Bracknell, but enjoying the experience. So, Dad, we will one day walk in the earth made new.
Hi, my name's Eric. I'm Grandad's fourth youngest grandson. I had many experiences with Grandad. He was, some would say, and I would agree with them, a very special man. I spent many times enjoying his company. He would come round after our Sabbath church service to have lunch, and he would endlessly talk at the table about any number of issues, and we could ask him questions, whether to do with the war or his experiences as an artist or and ministry or whatever. He'd just have endless stories. In some ways our family got tired of hearing them, but I think that wasn't something that we would want to share with you, but anyway. So anyway, but the greatest thing about him was that you'd take him out and he'd just be such a character. I mean, I'd go to a shop and I'd be paying for something and he had a conversation with the retail assistant, and by the end of it he was just talking to her the whole time, or to the person, and I'd be just left standing there for hours, for ages, and then they'd break off or whatever. It just happened every time, and it was this way of him connecting with people, which was very special. I was fortunate enough to go on holiday with him, Madeira, Africa, different places, and I felt like I was with David Attenborough. He knew everything about everything. Animals, birds, trees. He seemed to know that a lot when it came to that. And you know, there was a number of times when we would have quite important people to lunch, so neurosurgeons or something like that, and they would ask him questions and he would be like, yeah, I know that, and then they'd be like, man, this guy really knows what he's talking about. So it's a little bit strange to have someone with such a capacity of mind at such age just wandering around talking to people, but this is what we had for a very long time, and I think we'll miss that, and I appreciate that he will be greatly missed. And as a bit of a legend, I'd like to say, you know, goodbye. Also, you know, hello for eternity, and that's the great hope that we all have.
Hi, you might know Brian, because I like to share some memories of the adventurer with big ideas, who had a passion for Christ, who we call Grandad. Grandad played a huge role in my life, baptising me, marrying us, dedicating our son, and also planning to dedicate our daughter, just to mention a few of the big events that he was involved in. Grandad would describe himself as a recycled teenager. It was a snowy January morning at Heathrow Airport, and having shared the night in a hotel room, we were embarking on an adventure. Grandad was going to Bogota. He was going to marry us. I remember one of the particular funny moments when we were transferring at Madrid Airport. There we had lined up a wheelchair and assisted transfer. And he was quite reluctant to get into the wheelchair, but he got into the wheelchair and they wheeled us off to the next aeroplane. And just the expression on his face as he jumped out of that wheelchair really sent the surprise to all the assistants. This is a great example of Grandad, the recycled teenager. Grandad is also very sentimental. I remember him opening the door with his wedding clothes all there, his suit all ready, and my wife looking quite shocked. We found out later that the suit that he was wearing was exactly the same suit that he wore over 40 years ago when he was marrying my parents. This is now quite a precious memory. Now, we've had a few adventures with Grandad, and one of the more recent ones was when we took a flight out to Tanzania to do safari with the family. And my wife has got some really nice memories of Grandad, which she'll share there.
Yes, we will always remember Grandad as this amazing and exceptional human being who was very passionate about Christ and bringing everybody to Christ, and to be able to be all together in heaven when Christ is coming for a second time. I remember he being really friendly in this trip in the safari, camping with us and meeting many people, and be always sharing, always people being very open to him because his approach is very friendly. And I clearly remember him taking details about the telephone and the addresses, and later on he was sending literature to them. And at the transfer in the different at the different airports, always he was going to be checked. Always the BBB was for Grandad, and he was ready to be checked and ready to speak about Christ to the people who were checking him. And they were so surprised about Grandad, and they were happy of having met him, and at the end they were helping him. So I remember Grandad always saying, look, anyone that you meet is an opportunity for Christ, and for that person to be saved. So I remember him with that great passion for everybody, to give an opportunity to everybody.
Yes, that was an amazing trip, and I wish we had more time to talk about Grandad, but I guess one of the other interesting memories from that trip was when he was on the beach there, and there were some people trading and selling trinkets, and he would use the opportunity to open up a conversation. And I do remember this one day where there was a whole crowd of people listening to him, and he was telling them, look, I don't need these trinkets, but what you do need is you need to be ready for when Jesus comes. And he was telling people to go to their local churches and read their Bible, and people were listening, and they were interested in what this 96-year-old was having to say. Moving forwards, Grandad was also a gentleman of really big ideas. Grandad would review his life, and he would tell me and us that by providence these things happened. Now, providence, he would see how his life was unfolding with providence. Grandad's love of this, and also patterns and ratio, played into this artistic way of organising both the natural world and biblical truths with this level of precision and beauty. These big ideas help us find meaning, and I have personally benefited from seeing life from the perspective of faith and providence. I hope sharing some of these memories in celebrating Grandad's life with his broader friends and contacts have helped people know what a great grandfather he was, and a great grandfather.
Grandad was an artist, and his life was testament to the transformative power of art. His craft gave him opportunity. He was born into poverty, and where others would leave school at 12, he gained a scholarship to art school, taking evening classes for the next 8 years. This gained him a safe role during the war, and I remember him telling me how he'd paint maps of Burma onto rice paper so that stranded pilots could eat the map before they were captured. I think about how, if Grandad couldn't paint, perhaps my family wouldn't be here today. I also think about all the stories Grandad didn't tell. There's a painting in my parents' house of an Indian girl carrying water. Did Grandad know her? Or did she just pose for a minute? I never found out. Art gave Grandad an eye for detail. He took me to a gallery in Bournemouth when I was a teenager. We looked at an imposing Renaissance crowd scene, crammed with bodies falling over each other. I wasn't that interested, but I remember Grandad honing in on one corner, and he explained to me how the brushstrokes mimicked the effect of muddy water. We like to talk about the big picture, but for Grandad the details mattered, and if you care to look, there's joy in that too. I think it's this attention to detail that Grandad took into his study of the Bible. I found Grandad's writing hard to follow, but in his art there's clarity. There's a picture on his wall of a school in Rusonga, Zambia, where he taught. The architecture's unremarkable. You see a walkway with thin steel pillars sandwiched between horizontal slabs. Beyond the walkway, there's a garden bathed in morning light. There are no people. You get the sense from Grandad's painting that this was a place of structure, order, and stillness. A place to be with your thoughts. Art was Grandad's way of showing his generosity. He painted a mural in my childhood bedroom of Postman Pat. What a privilege to grow up in a room filled with colour. My dad's office had a painting of farm workers harvesting wheat, symbolising the church's mission. Graduations at Newbold would have huge backdrops painted by Grandad. And as someone who graduated in a drab 1970s bunker, I'd like those graduates to know how lucky they were to have colour on their special day. Finally, Grandad showed me that art is good for your soul. It's great when art reaches other people, but even if it doesn't, there's joy in the process, of playing with ideas and techniques, of thoughtful activity. Grandad knew this from art school, and he carried it throughout his life. Even in hospital, his bedside was teetering with books and magazines he hoped to assimilate. He never stopped taking satisfaction from making things. I look forward to picking up my pen.
Dear Grandad, it wasn't always easy to show our appreciation in words. Your hearing difficulties meant that conversations sometimes had to be focused on the basics, and we didn't always get a chance to convey to you our more detailed thoughts. We wanted to tell you how much we admired and respected your forward-thinking and brilliant example of health. Long before it became fashionable and then unfashionable and then fashionable again, you taught us about the horrors of refined sugar that you'd seen firsthand in the chocolate factory. You eschewed foods that were unhelpful to an energetic life, and you hiked and rambled vigorously to the end. Your principles paid off. But for some bad luck with a rare infection most recently, you were as fit as a fiddle and of clear mind. Nobody could doubt that you practiced what you preached. I wanted to tell you how I enjoyed our walks around the garden as a kid. I loved hearing the details of how to measure rainfall, how to make great compost, and how to grow espalier apple trees. I remember driving around the Yorkshire Dales and watching you shovel horse muck into the boot for your garden. It was all completely second nature to you to conserve things and take care with the natural resources around you. That seems to be a hard lesson to teach these days. I wanted to tell you how envious I was of your adventures in India, Pakistan, Africa, and beyond. Your paintings of faraway places at interesting times were exciting, and I pored over them whenever I visited your house. It seemed to me that you lived life as you pleased, or at least found the pleasure as you went along. Isn't that what we all aspire to pursue our own path and enjoy rich experiences along the way? I wanted to ask you what the secret was of being able to approach complete strangers and strike up an easy rapport. Even the surly ones were laughing at a well-chosen anecdote after a few minutes, and likely as not, you'd walk away with a name and address, and we would be writing to them years later. I was impressed to discover at Grandma's funeral the number of people who had been grateful to receive your letters for years or decades. We so appreciated your letters, and we wished we had replied more often. We won't ever forget how you turned up to our wedding armed with a German dictionary, determined to build bridges with the grandparents on the other side, and they were certainly charmed by your efforts. I wanted to tell you how much I admired your lifelong curiosity and interest in really everything. One week it was economics, the next genetics, the next something else. I could buy you a magazine or journal on anything, and you would get stuck into it without question. Most of us find it hard to get out of our rut and really engage with knowledge we're unfamiliar with. You just dived in and learned whatever you could. The world of education has come to promote what they call the growth mentality, but you were onto something long before. Just one last memory. I'd been home from hospital with my first baby, your first grandchild, for a matter of hours. You didn't know we were home yet, nobody did. There we were, still reeling from the shock, and there was a knock at the door. Who on earth could that possibly be? I peered through the door in my dressing gown, and there you were with your dusty leather-bound atlas, presumably with maps of a London that looks a little different now. It had taken many hours to traverse the city, and you'd even had to stop for lunch on the way, but the look on your face told us you were glad you'd made it. It was a thrill to introduce you to our baby, and such an honour that you'd made such an effort. That validation at the important moments means everything, and truly you were the paterfamilias that day. Thank you for visiting, Grandad. We so regret the circumstances meant we couldn't all come to say goodbye in person. When we step back and take stock, though, we're grateful that it was only a small part of an otherwise rich and meaningful and very long life. Thank you for everything you taught us, Grandad.
Our tribute would not be complete without speaking about the faith of the pastor. Like Dad, I have the habit of breath whistling, and lately it's been the hymn, Faith of Our Fathers, Living Still. The headline comes from Hebrews 11, and it lists a cloud of witnesses: Abel, Enoch, Abraham, Sarah, where faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It lists the exploits and virtues of each, and it's about people who stepped out, people who took risks, leaps of faith in the name of their Maker, each with a different expectation. Then it concludes, all of these obtained a good testimony through faith. Though they did not receive the promise, God having provided something better. Reflecting on Dad's practice, his prayers for his family, for his friends, for his church, for guidance in every detail of his life, his conversation was personal and familiar with the God to whom he prayed. His ability to recall and identify any passage of Scripture pointed to the one who knew the voice of God. We are encouraged by the occasions when Dad stepped out and moved around the world in response to a call, with no idea how things would turn out, in simple faith that the Lord will provide. All things work together for good is a quote he often used. His research stepped outside the bounds of scholarship with the idea that his creator and designer, the eternal artist and architect, the founder and the builder of our faith, worked to a pattern. He may well do. The canvas and the formula is yet to be discovered, but when it is, it'll be more elegant than any of us could imagine. This is the promise which Dad, desperate in his search, met his Maker. But for us, the exercise of faith has yet one more father.
Bye bye, great grandma. Bye bye, great granddad. You're my funniest grandad.